would rather have coffee or brunch with someone than going. I don't drink. I find it
There's a moment in every viral controversy where everything shifts, where what people thought they knew suddenly gets ripped apart in seconds. And right now, that moment is happening all over the internet. Because brand new footage allegedly showing Erika Kirk has just surfaced online. And within hours, it has triggered absolute chaos across social media. At first glance, it looks simple. Just a casual night out. A group setting, loud music, people laughing. The kind of clip that normally disappears into the internet's endless scroll without a second thought. But this time, people did not scroll past. They stopped, they replayed it, they zoomed in. And then they started asking the question that instantly changed the entire tone of the conversation. What exactly are we looking at here? Because according to viral claims spreading across platforms, this footage allegedly shows Erika in a state that many viewers are calling uncharacteristically intoxicated, raising immediate debate about whether the public image she built for years actually matches the reality behind the scenes. And the internet, it didn't hesitate. Within minutes, comment sections exploded into two completely opposite worlds. One side is furious, claiming this is proof that the carefully constructed, perfect conservative identity was never as clean as it appeared. They argue that everything people were told about lifestyle, values, and personal discipline is now under serious question. But the other side is pushing back just as hard, accusing the internet of manufacturing outrage out of a single moment, ripping private behavior out of context, and turning normal human nightlife into a global spectacle. And right in the middle of all this noise, another detail is making things even stranger. People are noticing that the clip doesn't just raise questions about behavior. It raises questions about timing, consistency, and the version of reality that has been publicly presented over the years. Because if this footage is real, and if it is what people think it is, then the bigger question is not what happened in that moment. It's how many other moments might exist that the public has never seen. And more importantly, why is this just surfacing now? The internet is still trying to process what it thinks it just saw in that leaked footage, and the reactions are only getting louder by the hour. Because now, the story is no longer just about a single clip anymore. It has expanded into something much bigger, something far more emotionally charged, something that is pulling in years of public perception, carefully built identity, and the intense scrutiny surrounding a life lived partly in the spotlight. And at the center of it all is Erika Kirk. For years, Erika has been presented to the public in a very specific way. Not just as a political spouse, not just as a media figure, but as a symbol of consistency, discipline, faith, stability. The kind of personality that audiences could easily understand, trust, and emotionally connect with inside a highly polarized political environment. Her public image was built on simplicity, clean lifestyle, strong values, conservative alignment, a disciplined personal identity that matched the world she was associated with. And in the world of political media, where perception often becomes identity, that consistency became her strongest asset. Because audiences don't just follow people, they follow narratives. And Erika's narrative was clear. But clarity is exactly what the internet starts attacking first, when something unexpected appears. Especially when that something is a video that seems to contradict everything people believed they understood. Now, alongside Erika's rising visibility, the presence of Charlie Kirk has always been part of the larger context. His public life, political influence, and strong ideological branding meant that anyone close to him would inevitably become part of a broader cultural spotlight. That spotlight doesn't just illuminate, it magnifies. Every detail becomes amplified. Every statement gets replayed. Every inconsistency becomes a topic of discussion. And that's exactly how this situation began to evolve. At first, there was no controversy. There was only perception. Interviews where Erika spoke about values. Public appearances that reinforced a consistent identity. Moments that painted a picture of someone deeply aligned with the worldview she represented. To supporters, it all looked perfectly coherent. To critics, it looked curated. But the truth is, most public figures exist somewhere in between those two interpretations. People evolve. They adapt. They grow into different versions of themselves, depending on the environment they are in, the relationships they form, and the pressure that comes with visibility. However, once a narrative becomes emotionally important to an audience, even normal evolution can start to feel like contradiction. And contradiction is where the internet becomes dangerous. Because once viewers believe they've found inconsistency, They don't stop at one example. They start building patterns. They start connecting unrelated moments. They start reconstructing timelines in ways that make everything feel intentional instead of coincidental. That is exactly what started happening here. Older clips resurfaced. Interviews were rewatched with new suspicion. Quotes were compared across different time periods. And suddenly, ordinary human complexity was being reframed as something much more strategic, much more deliberate, and much more calculated than anyone originally assumed. Then came the shift that changed everything: the leaked footage. The clip that people are now circulating across every platform, dissecting frame by frame, arguing over tone, context, behavior, and intent. Because once a single visual piece of content enters the conversation, everything else becomes reinterpreted through it. Now, every past interview feels different. Every statement feels heavier. Every detail feels like it might have meant something else entirely. And that is how online narratives escalate, quietly at first, then all at once. But what makes this situation even more intense is that it is not happening in isolation. It is happening inside a highly politicized environment where identity, morality, and public trust are already deeply sensitive topics. That means even small inconsistencies don't stay small for long. They expand, they multiply, they attract interpretation from every possible direction. Supporters of Erika argue that this entire situation is exactly what happens when private moments are stripped of context and turned into public spectacle. They say the internet is taking a normal human moment and inflating it into something unrecognizable simply because the individual involved exists in a politically visible space. Critics argue something completely different. They believe the issue is not the clip itself, but what it represents in relation to everything that has been said publicly over the years. They claim that when a public identity is built around discipline and consistency, any contradiction, no matter how small, becomes significant. And so the argument becomes less about truth and more about trust. Because once trust is questioned, everything else becomes unstable. Every memory becomes questionable. Every past statement becomes re-evaluated. Every public appearance becomes a clue instead of a moment. And that is where the internet currently stands. Not with answers, but with interpretations. And interpretations, once they start multiplying, rarely move in the same direction. They spread, they evolve, they conflict. And they build pressure until the next piece of content drops. The next clip appears, or the next insider detail surfaces online, which is exactly what audiences are now waiting for. Because whether this footage is meaningful, misleading, or completely misunderstood, one thing is already clear. The conversation around Erika Kirk is no longer about one moment. It has become a full-scale narrative collapse, where every new detail is pulling the entire story in a different direction. And the worst part? The internet feels like it's only just getting started. The moment the footage began spreading across platforms, the entire conversation shifted from speculation to outright confrontation. Because now it was no longer just about perception, or old interviews, or resurfaced clips being interpreted differently, depending on who was watching. Now there was a single piece of content sitting at the center of everything. A clip that allegedly shows Erika Kirk in a way that directly clashes with the carefully maintained public identity people had come to recognize over the years. And once that contradiction entered the picture, the internet did what it always does at maximum intensity. It split in half. One half saw the footage and immediately jumped to conclusions. They called it exposure and proof that the public narrative was incomplete. The other half saw the same clip and called it selective framing, context removal, and phanopactured outrage designed for clicks. But neither side could ignore it, because once a visual narrative enters the ecosystem, it becomes almost impossible to contain. Within hours, the clip was everywhere, reposted, edited, slowed down, zoomed in. Paired with dramatic music, paired with old interviews, paired with emotional commentary from creators trying to decode what they were seeing. And that's when the first major twist began forming, not in the footage itself, but in how people started interpreting it. At first, the claims were relatively simple. Viewers said Erika appeared uncharacteristically intoxicated during the moment captured on camera. That alone would normally have been enough to fuel temporary online discussion before fading away. But this time, something different happened. People didn't move on. They started digging. And the digging turned into something much more aggressive. Old clips of Erika speaking about lifestyle, discipline, and personal values began resurfacing. In those interviews, she had reportedly described herself in very controlled terms, emphasizing structure, consistency, and a life aligned with specific principles. Supporters argue that this is exactly what public figures do. They present their values clearly, even if private moments occasionally differ. But critics started framing it differently. They began constructing a timeline, a narrative timeline, a behavioral timeline, a pattern. And that word, pattern, changed everything. Because once people believe they see a pattern, every unrelated detail suddenly starts to feel connected. Now, the conversation was no longer just about one night out. It was about identity consistency over time. And that is where things escalated sharply. Clips allegedly showing Erika in different social settings began circulating again. Some were years old, some unverified, some heavily edited by creators. But in the algorithm-driven chaos of social media, authenticity often takes a backseat to emotional impact. And emotional impact was everywhere. One viral thread claimed that Erika's public persona had always been too clean to be organic. Another argued that people were unfairly attacking a woman for having a normal social past before entering a highly visible political environment. But then came the moment that turned this into a full-blown conflict instead of just another online debate. A resurfaced connection. According to viral posts circulating across platforms, some users began pointing out that the footage originally came from a social account linked to a relative, reportedly Erika Kirk's cousin, who had posted casual personal content years earlier before it was later rediscovered and amplified by anonymous accounts. That detail changed the tone instantly, because now the argument wasn't just about interpretation, it was about origin. Why was this footage resurfacing now? Who had circulated it? And why was it suddenly everywhere at the exact same time? That question alone created a second wave of speculation that spread even faster than the video itself. Some creators claimed it was organic resurfacing, algorithm-driven rediscovery of old content. Others insisted it looked coordinated, as if multiple accounts were amplifying the same material simultaneously. And that is where the first major twist began forming. Because as attention intensified, another detail started circulating in comment sections and live streams. People began comparing timelines. Not just of Erika's public appearances, but of her statements about lifestyle and identity versus what the footage appeared to show. And that comparison created a conflict that neither supporters nor critics could easily resolve. Supporters argued that people grow and change. That early adulthood is messy. That old footage does not define someone's current values. They emphasized that public figures are constantly held to impossible standards, where any inconsistency becomes ammunition. Critics responded with something more structured. They argued that the issue was not change, it was narrative control. They claimed Erika had presented a highly consistent public identity over time, and that this new footage allegedly contradicted that identity in a way that could not be easily dismissed as just growth. And once that framing took hold, the internet moved into full investigative mode. Every interview became evidence. Every statement became data. Every appearance became part of a reconstructed identity chart. And the pressure increased dramatically when influencers with large audiences began reacting. Some political commentators defended Erika immediately, warning against what they described as digital character assassination. Others were more cautious, saying the footage raised questions that deserved clarity. That middle ground didn't last long, because ambiguity is not something the internet tolerates well during viral cycles. Soon, creators were forced into positions, either defend or criticize. Neutrality disappeared. And with it, the conversation became even more extreme. Then came the first real emotional shock in the narrative. A viral compilation video began circulating that placed Erika's past statements side by side with the leaked footage. The video was edited for maximum emotional contrast. Calm interviews on one side, nightlife clips on the other, with dramatic pacing designed to heighten perceived contradiction. Within hours, it hit millions of views, and people reacted strongly. Some viewers said they felt betrayed even though they had no personal connection to the individual involved. Others said they felt manipulated by the editing itself, arguing that the video was designed to create outrage rather than understanding. But regardless of interpretation, the damage was done. The conversation had escalated, and then came the first major twist that pushed everything into a darker direction. An anonymous account posted a thread claiming that the footage was not just being discussed randomly, but was allegedly being amplified by multiple coordinated accounts at the same time. The post suggested that the timing of the resurfacing might not be accidental. That idea changed everything, because now people were no longer just debating behavior. They were debating intent behind the narrative itself. Was this an organic viral moment, or was it being pushed deliberately? And if so, by whom? Suddenly, the conversation expanded beyond Erika. It began pulling in broader political ecosystems, media influence networks, and online engagement strategies used to shape public perception during high-profile controversies. And that's when the second layer of the twist emerged. A growing number of creators began claiming that the footage itself, regardless of authenticity, was being used as a symbolic trigger to question everything about Erika's public identity, including her relationship narrative, her past statements, and even her role within conservative political branding circles. Supporters called this absurd. Critics called it inevitable. Because once a narrative reaches this level of visibility, meaning stops being fixed, it becomes fluid, and every viewer starts constructing their own version of truth based on what they believe fits the pattern. Meanwhile, inside the discussions surrounding Charlie Kirk, older interviews and public appearances began resurfacing again, this time analyzed not for content, but for emotional subtext. Did he look aware? Did he look distant? Did he ever react to inconsistencies people now claim to see? None of these questions had clear answers, but they didn't need them. Because the internet wasn't trying to solve a case anymore. It was building a narrative. And narratives don't require certainty. They require momentum, and that momentum was only getting stronger. By the end of this phase, the situation had fully transformed from a simple viral clip into a multi-layered controversy involving identity, perception, timing, and trust. And just as people thought they were beginning to understand what was happening, a new claim began circulating that would push the entire conversation into its next explosive stage. Just when the internet thought it had already reached the peak of this controversy, everything escalated again. Because the conversation around the footage involving Erika Kirk didn't slow down, it multiplied. What started as a single leaked clip had now evolved into a full-blown digital storm, where every new post, every new comment, and every new analysis was adding another layer of tension to an already volatile narrative. And this time, the shift wasn't just emotional, it was structural. Because suddenly, the debate was no longer only about what people thought they saw. It was about who was controlling what people were allowed to see. Within hours of the clip circulating, a new wave of posts began appearing across platforms, claiming that the footage was being strategically pushed by clusters of anonymous accounts. Some users pointed out strange timing patterns, identical reposts appearing within seconds of each other, captions that used similar phrasing, and comment sections that seemed unusually synchronized in tone. Whether that was coincidence or coordination became the next massive point of argument online. And that is where the escalation truly began. Because once people start questioning distribution, they stop focusing on content alone. They start questioning intent. And intent is where narratives either collapse or explode. At the same time, older clips of Erika's interviews and public statements resurfaced again. But this time they were being reframed in a much more aggressive way. Every phrase she had ever used to describe her lifestyle, her values, and her personal history was now being dissected in comparison with the viral footage. Supporters argued this was unfair. They said people were isolating moments from years apart, stripping them of context, and building a false impression of contradiction. But critics were no longer interested in isolated moments. They were building what they called a behavioral map, a reconstructed timeline of identity. And according to them, the map showed inconsistencies too significant to ignore. As this narrative intensified, a second wave of content hit the internet. This time, it wasn't just the original clip. It was compilations, edited breakdowns, side-by-side comparisons, slow-motion analysis videos, and commentary threads attempting to explain what really happened in the footage. One of the most viral threads claimed that the original context of the clip had been misunderstood entirely, suggesting that the behavior shown could have been exaggerated by editing, lighting, and selective framing. Another viral thread argued the exact opposite, that the footage was only the tip of the iceberg, and that more content from the same period allegedly existed but had not yet been released. That claim, whether true or not, completely changed the tone of the conversation. Because now people weren't debating a single moment anymore. They were waiting for more. And anticipation is where online controversies become uncontrollable. Then came the moment that escalated everything into a new level of intensity. A viral post began circulating from an anonymous account claiming to have contextual knowledge about how the footage originally resurfaced. The post suggested that the video was not newly discovered at all, but had been privately circulating in smaller circles for some time before exploding publicly. It also claimed that multiple versions of the clip existed, each slightly different in quality and framing, which fueled speculation that the footage had been passed through several hands before reaching the mainstream internet. None of this was verified, but it didn't need to be, because in viral environments, implication often carries more weight than confirmation. And once that idea took hold, everything changed again. Now the question wasn't just what is in the footage, it became, why did it surface now? And that question quickly expanded into something even bigger. Was this a random resurfacing of old content? Or was it timed, and if it was timed, what was it timed with? That is when the conversation took its most dramatic turn yet, because attention suddenly shifted to the broader ecosystem surrounding political media figures, online influence networks, and the constant cycle of content amplification that drives modern discourse. People began arguing that nothing this viral happens by accident anymore. Others pushed back, saying that this kind of thinking turns every piece of content into a conspiracy. But neither side could stop the momentum, especially when new commentary videos started appearing analyzing not just the footage, but Erika's entire public identity structure. And that's where the so-called shocking reveal began forming in the narrative. A theory started spreading that the real issue was not the footage itself, but the contrast between two versions of Erika that existed simultaneously in public perception. One version built through interviews, statements, and carefully curated public appearances, and another version emerging through resurfaced clips, older content, and unfiltered moments that had not been part of her mainstream narrative. Critics claimed this contradiction was evidence of deliberate image construction. Supporters argued it was simply the reality of a public figure growing and evolving under pressure. But the most viral interpretation framed it differently, not as growth, not as deception, but as dual identity perception, where the public constructs a simplified version of a person and then reacts violently when reality appears more complex than the narrative they believed. That idea alone fueled millions of new comments and debates. But the escalation didn't stop there, because shortly after, another layer entered the conversation. Posts began circulating, claiming that individuals close to Erika's early social circle had allegedly spoken about her past in ways that differed from her current public narrative. Again, nothing confirmed, no official documentation, no verifiable sources, just anonymous claims spreading rapidly across platforms already primed for suspicion. And yet, that was enough to push the story into its next phase, because once a narrative reaches this stage, truth becomes secondary to momentum. At the same time, references to Erika Kirk began reappearing in discussions, not as the central focus, but as a contextual anchor. People started re-examining old interviews, public appearances, and past statements involving both individuals, trying to identify whether anything in hindsight looked different or symbolic. Every gesture was reinterpreted. Every pause was analyzed. Every statement was reconsidered under the new narrative lens created by the viral footage. And that is how escalation works in real time. It doesn't just add information. It rewrites interpretation. By this point, even neutral observers were getting pulled into the cycle of analysis. Because the story had expanded beyond a single person or single moment, it had become a layered debate about authenticity, identity construction, and the power of viral media to reshape public perception instantly. And just when it seemed like the internet might begin to stabilize, a new claim surfaced. One that suggested there may be additional unseen footage still circulating in private circles. And that claim, whether real or not, was enough to push the entire situation into its next phase of absolute chaos. By now, the story surrounding Erika Kirk had completely escaped the boundaries of a normal online controversy. It wasn't just trending anymore, it was dominating. Every platform, every comment section, every political commentary channel, everyone was reacting, dissecting, arguing, and taking sides in real time as the narrative continued to spiral without pause. And what made this phase different was simple. Nobody was watching quietly anymore. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone wanted to be heard. On one side, supporters rushed in immediately, defending Erika and pushing back against what they described as a digital character assassination campaign. They argued that a single resurfaced clip, no matter how it looked, was being weaponized far beyond its original context. They insisted that the internet had a habit of turning normal human behavior into something suspicious, simply because the person involved exists in a politically visible environment. To them, this wasn't a revelation, it was a distortion. But on the other side, critics saw something completely different. They believed the footage, combined with resurfaced interviews and old clips, painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. They argued that this wasn't about one moment, it was about consistency, narrative alignment, and public honesty. And once those two perspectives locked in, the divide became instant and emotional. There was no middle ground left, only camps, only conflict, only interpretation. Influencers and commentators quickly entered the conversation, each amplifying their own framing of the situation. Some political voices defended Erika strongly, warning audiences not to fall into what they called algorithm-driven outrage cycles. Others were far more skeptical, suggesting that public figures who build their identity around consistency must expect scrutiny when contradictions appear. As expected, the debate escalated rapidly, and social media did what social media always does in moments like this. It turned complexity into conflict. It turned nuance into slogans. It turned uncertainty into arguments. Memes started circulating within hours, some mocking the controversy, others defending Erika, and others simply using the situation as raw material for viral engagement. Reaction videos flooded YouTube and TikTok. Livestream debates ran for hours. Comment sections turned into battlefields. And every new post seemed to intensify the divide rather than resolve it. Even neutral users began feeling pressure to choose a side. Because in moments like this, neutrality is treated as silence, and silence is interpreted as agreement. Meanwhile, political commentary circles began framing the situation in a much broader way. Instead of focusing solely on the footage, they started discussing the nature of modern public identity itself. How much of what we see online is authentic? How much is curated? And how quickly does perception become reality once enough people believe it? That conversation alone pushed the story beyond celebrity gossip and into something closer to cultural analysis. But even that didn't calm the situation, because new posts continued to surface, each one adding another layer of interpretation to the already unstable narrative. Some users claimed they were noticing coordinated messaging patterns in how the footage was being discussed online. Others dismissed that entirely, saying it was just algorithmic amplification, making it look more organized than it actually was. But regardless of what was true, the effect was the same. The conversation kept growing, and growing, and growing. At the center of all this attention, Erika Kirk was also being pulled back into the narrative, not through direct involvement, but through constant reference. Old clips resurfaced. Past interviews were rewatched. Public appearances were reanalyzed under the lens of the current controversy. People began asking retrospective questions. Did anything look unusual in hindsight? Was there anything missed at the time? Did public perception align with private reality? These questions had no concrete answers, but they didn't need them to spread, because in viral cycles, questions are often more powerful than answers. And that is what kept fueling engagement across every platform. Even mainstream commentary outlets began acknowledging the trend, not confirming any claims, but noting how quickly narratives can spiral when emotional framing overtakes factual grounding. Still, that acknowledgement did little to slow the momentum, because the internet had already moved beyond the need for verification. It was now operating on interpretation, and interpretation is infinitely expandable. Every new viewer adds a new angle. Every new creator adds a new theory. Every new reaction adds a new layer of emotional intensity. By the end of this wave of reactions, one thing had become undeniable. The story was no longer about what actually happened in a single video. It was about what people believed that video represented. And that gap between what is shown and what is believed is exactly where controversies like this become unstoppable. Because once belief takes over, the story no longer belongs to the people in it. It belongs to the audience watching it unfold. Just when the noise around the footage involving Erika Kirk seemed like it couldn't possibly get any louder, something unexpected happened. Not another clip, not another reaction video, but a shift in the direction of the entire conversation. Because up until this point, the internet had been locked into one main idea, that everything revolved around a single viral moment and what it supposedly revealed. But now new posts began circulating that completely reframed the situation. At first they were small, almost easy to ignore. Anonymous accounts suggesting that the footage being debated everywhere might not be the final version of the story, that there could be additional context, additional angles, additional material that had not yet entered public circulation. And the moment that idea appeared online, everything changed again. Because even the people defending Erika began to hesitate. Because they accepted the claims, but because uncertainty itself had become the dominant force in the narrative. The internet wasn't reacting to facts anymore, it was reacting to possibility. And possibility is far more powerful than confirmation. Within hours, speculation exploded that multiple versions of the same footage might exist, each interpreted differently depending on where it originated or how it was shared. Some users claimed the clip being widely discussed was missing surrounding context. Others insisted that what people were seeing was already softened compared to earlier circulation versions. None of this was verified. None of it could be traced to a confirmed source. But that didn't matter, because the narrative had already reached a stage where absence of clarity became its own form of fuel. And then came the moment that pushed everything into its final escalation phase. A new claim began spreading faster than anything before it. According to anonymous posts being shared across multiple platforms, there were allegedly individuals connected to early circles around Erika's public life who were now quietly discussing inconsistencies in older narratives that had resurfaced alongside the viral footage. No names were confirmed, no statements were verified. But the implication alone was enough to reignite every previous theory that had been circulating. Suddenly, people were no longer talking about a single clip. They were talking about a pattern of interpretation, about how identity is constructed in public view, about how narratives evolve when old content reappears in a new emotional context, and about whether the internet is actually uncovering truth or simply rewriting it in real time. At the same time, references to Erika Kirk re-entered the conversation in a more reflective way. Not as a central figure in the footage itself, but as a symbolic anchor in the broader discussion about public perception, trust, and narrative consistency. People began revisiting old interviews, not looking for new information, but for emotional tone, for hesitation, for phrasing that could be reinterpreted under the new wave of suspicion. And that is where things became truly unstable. Because once interpretation becomes the primary tool, nothing remains fixed. Every clip becomes flexible. Every quote becomes debatable. Every memory becomes reconstructible. And just as the conversation seemed to settle into this endless loop of analysis and counter-analysis, another twist emerged that pulled everything back into chaos. A viral post claimed that certain content creators were beginning to privately admit that the situation had expanded beyond verifiable commentary, suggesting that even experienced commentators were struggling to separate confirmed details from audience-driven narrative layering. In simpler terms, the story had grown faster than anyone's ability to verify it, and that realization alone sent another wave of tension through the entire discussion. Because if even analysts and commentators couldn't keep up, then what chance did the audience have? But the final twist wasn't just about confusion, it was about anticipation. Because shortly after that claim spread, another wave of posts began hinting that something new might be coming soon. Not necessarily a video, not necessarily a statement, but something that would supposedly recontextualize everything that has already been seen. And that phrase, recontextualize everything, became the spark that reignited the entire cycle. Now the internet wasn't just debating what had happened. It was waiting for confirmation, waiting for contradiction, waiting for the next piece of the puzzle that would either validate or destroy everything that had been built so far. And in that waiting, the tension became heavier than the information itself. Because everyone could feel it. The story wasn't over, not even close. And whatever comes next might not just add to the narrative, it might completely rewrite it. And just like that, the situation has reached a point where everyone is talking, but nobody is fully certain what is real anymore. The footage involving Erika Kirk has now turned into something much bigger than a single viral moment. It has become a full-scale internet debate about identity, perception, and how quickly a public narrative can shift when emotion takes control of interpretation. But now it's your turn. Because this is where the conversation stops being one-sided and becomes something active, something ongoing, something driven by real audience reaction. What do you think is actually happening here? Do you believe this entire situation is just another example of the internet, overanalyzing a normal human moment and turning it into something far bigger than it ever was meant to be? Or do you think there are real inconsistencies in how public identity has been presented over time, and that people are right to question what they are seeing? And what about the role of commentary voices who have been weighing in on this situation? Are they helping audiences understand context, or are they amplifying confusion by adding interpretation on top of interpretation? Even more importantly, why does this type of story spread so fast in the first place? Why does one clip, one moment, one interpretation have the power to completely dominate online conversation within hours? These are the questions dividing audiences right now. And there is no neutral space left anymore, only perspectives. So drop your thoughts in the comments below. Agree, disagree, or break it down your own way. Let's say something. Because this is one of those situations where silence is not part of the conversation. If you want more deep breakdowns of stories like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. Because if new information drops, you'll hear about it first right here. And based on how fast this situation is evolving, that next update might come sooner than anyone expects. Because this story isn't slowing down, it's only getting started.